Welcome to the Cambridge Union. We're absolutely delighted to welcome tonight actor Rupert Everett. I don't think he needs any introduction to all of you who are here today, but I will anyway. One of Britain's best-loved stage and screen actors, Rupert's first big breakthrough was his highly acclaimed appearance in Another Country, the play and the film. His film successes, to name but a few, have included My Best Friend's Wedding, An Ideal Husband, The Importance of Being Earnest, Shakespeare in Love, The Next Best Thing, as well as playing Prince Charming in Shrek, and of course the unforgettable headmistress in the St. Trinian series. Also a musician and an author, he has written novels and most recently made waves with his second memoirs, Vanished Years. Rupert, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I'll ask a few questions to Rupert first, and then we'll open it up to all of you for questions. Can I just ask you all not to take any photos or make any video recordings and turn off your mobile phones? We'll have our video recording and, and photos on the website for you to see tomorrow.
It's amazing. I'm working in the theatre at the moment, and we have a thing before every show. It's ding-a-ling-ling, ding-a-ling-ling, ding-a-ling-ling-ling. Nobody ever turns their phone off still, and they always ring. Straight off, there we go.
Oh, well, there we go. At least
I rather enjoy it, actually.
Yeah. So you started off your career as an actor at age 16 and made your way to London. How did you get your first big break, and what was life like as an actor?
As a kid, well, it was a very different business in those days, because when I went to drama school, which was, I went to drama school in 1977, and came out in, I wasn't an actor at age 16, I became an actor for the first time professionally at about the age of 21. But when you became an actor in those days, it was a whole different vibe, really, because it was a vocational job. If you think about it, the communists thought they were going to get into this country through the theatre. Vanessa Redgrave and her brother Corin Redgrave were constantly at stage doors of theatre, thinking they could get communism into England through the theatre. That's how committed a world British show business, for want of a better word, was then. It's completely changed that horizon now.
It's much more politicised in...
What then?
The world
then
yeah.
you were very engaged with how you felt about life, everything. And so, my first break, you had to go and work in the old days to get a union card. You had to work in the provinces in repertory theatre, and you had to do it for 2 or 3 years. And my first break really was getting this really good job in one of the best theatres, which was in Glasgow. It's called the Citizens Theatre, and I worked there for about 3 or 4 years. 2 years probably, before getting my first really good job, which was this play, Another Country, which was about Guy Burgess, the spy.
Yeah, tell us more about Another Country. I mean, it's still an iconic film.
Why there were the 3 or 5 spies that came out of England after the war, and they found that all of them, or most of them, were public school educated and were here at Cambridge. And nobody could understand how these people who were so privileged could want to betray their country.
Yeah.
And Another Country is a very clever play by a guy called Julian Mitchell about the possible reason why somebody would like to do it. Guy Burgess, the character I played, was gay, and he was immediately ostracized in his school and could never get into the elite group, the kind of pop, the Eton pop group of elite students. And in those days, when the whole of British society was such an old boys network, which it isn't nowadays, once you'd been labelled in school, you were labelled for life. That was your career in the diplomatic, in anything. People would always relate it back to how you were, what they found, how they found you at school. And this play is a very interesting play about, what happens to a person who's ostracized for being gay very early on in his career.
That must have been absolutely fascinating. I mean, just on that subject, you've said that in your career, coming out as gay might have damaged it. Do you think how did that happen, and do you think that's the same for actors nowadays, or do you think the world's changed since then?
The world changes constantly, and obviously to be gay in England, for the most part, is quite good. Obviously, there's always bad things that happen to people, and it's difficult growing up as gay, perhaps when you're in school and things like that. But I forgot what I was saying now. What was I saying?
Has it changed? Has it been difficult for you in your career?
Yeah, in the career, show business is rather like sport. You know, sport is very, what I'm saying is in one side, society is very open, and then in another side, it's also still closed.
Yeah.
For example, there was every type of human being carried the Olympic torch. But was there ever, through the Olympic torch, that grim carrying of the Olympic torch around the world, was there ever a gay person? I don't think there was.
That's true.
And so there are still some areas in the world where it's not great to be gay. And certainly, for example, if you want to have a mainstream career as a leading actor in films, it's not ideal.
Did you feel it kind of typecast you?
You can maybe get to play the gay roles, or even though quite often the straight guys want to play the gay roles because they get lots of awards for doing so, but it doesn't work the other way around. So it's not easy. You know, cinema is also about the social aspect of cinema, and the public like wives and girlfriends and babies and this and that mostly. I don't. But you know, everything moves all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of your biggest successes earlier on in the career was My Best Friend's Wedding, where you were playing the gay role, and that was the biggest grossing film of the year, I think. So did you know at the time it was going to be such a massive success?
It wasn't early on in my career. It was about 15 years into my career, actually.
Middle way in.
Really, I did that film. I was in it when I was about 38. And I've been acting for probably 18 years then. That was a very lucky job for me, really. And it opened briefly a new vista, which was of working in Hollywood in the American film business, but it didn't last very long, to be quite honest. And I think I'm not a very good fit with America, probably. Because,
what do you mean by that?
Well, because going back to what I was saying to you about becoming an actor in the 70s in England, I think it's important to be yourself, and I think we live in a culture now that's so dwarfed by political correctness. And also in a culture of actors and performers who also sell perfumes and other things, which they never used to do. In the old days, an actor who worked in the cinema could not do an ad for a perfume or a lingerie line or makeup. It was just not on.
It would just seem frivolous, or
it would have taken away from what you really did.
Yeah.
Now, and the reason being is because once you are representing Longcom, you're also representing shareholders of Longcom. So if you want to have an opinion about apartheid, you better have the opinion that they have only. If you want to express yourself absolutely from the hip, honestly, it's not on. Which is why you have a community of musicians and actors who are they have the dead eyes of sharks in one sense, but they never say anything.
Yeah, absolutely true. You've been called by a writer that I read earlier today the closest thing we'll have to a 21st century Oscar Wilde. So, I mean, you've been in two films of two of Wilde's most famous plays. You're touring with the Judas Kiss as Oscar Wilde, and you're planning to produce a film about Oscar Wilde. Is he a particular interest of yours? Do you kind of see yourself in him? Or?
I think that's a stupid thing to say, to be quite honest, because not from your point of view, but just people. We're so lazy now. We're always comparing people to other people. Someone's the new this and someone's the new that, and it's really second-hand in one sense, because Oscar Wilde is Oscar Wilde in the time that Oscar Wilde was. The genius thing about Oscar Wilde, I think, is he's one of the great punctuation points between the 19th century and the 20th century. His life, as much as his work, really. His work's part of it, but he was an artwork himself. Just because I could be camp and witty occasionally, I don't think that means that I'm like Oscar Wilde, really.
But do you have a particular interest in him then, making this film, acting as him?
Yes, I really am fascinated by Wilde. Firstly, I suppose as a gay person, Wilde is really in a way, the starting point for the gay movement in England, in that it really wasn't a thing that was ever talked about in 19th century England, certainly not by women. You would never discuss with a woman homosexuality or anything like that. Maybe men who'd been at schools, particularly the great boarding schools, would have known about it, but they wouldn't even talk about it. Wilde, the huge, scandalous court case of Oscar Wilde's libel suit against Lord Queensberry became this amazing thing for which he was then put in prison, basically just for being gay.
Yeah.
And at that point, the debate began about, what it was to be gay, and was committing homosexual acts, was it a gross indecency? Right up until 67 or 70, before all of you, but very, very recent, it was still not acceptable in this country to be gay. And it's still, and in many ways, there's still tendrils from that old thing still left. But Wilde is a great character. Irish, he came to England and kind of got down on all fours like all the Irish writers and changed everything about himself. His accent went within 2 semesters at Oxford, and he became more English than the English, only to be destroyed by them in the end. So, and to end his life in exile, where he was an English person on holiday coming across Wilde would feel absolutely entitled to either spit at him or tell him to get out of the restaurant, or all these things. And it's a fascinating story that this man was so rich and glamorous. He was really it at a certain point in London. He had huge hit plays on all over the West End. He knew royalty. He was asked everywhere. He had a family. He had the perfect life in a way. And it's a great riches to rags story, because he ended up one of the great last European vagabonds of the 19th century, smelling of piss, sitting on a street corner, cadging drinks. And it's an amazing story.
And which part of that riches to rags transformation is the Judas Kiss about? What does that focus on?
Judas Kiss is a play by David Hare, which is coming to Cambridge on the 11th or 12th of November, I think, is a play about 2 particular scenes in Wilde's life that everyone can never understand how they happened. He arrived after the failure of his libel suit against the Marquis of Queensberry, who wrote a card saying that he was a gay, and he sued him for libel, which was a mistake because he was gay, even though he was married. And the Marquis of Queensberry came up with all this dirt, all these rent boys and hookers and things to come and give evidence against him. Here's a photographer.
There he is.
I forgot what I was saying again now.
So it focuses on 2 scenes that people don't understand why they happened.
So the first scene takes place in the Cadogan Hotel, where he went to after his first court case had failed.
Yeah.
And he was there for about 6 hours with his friends, and they found out from Parliament that they wanted him to leave the country rather than face the second part of the procedure, which was the government arresting him and trying him for gross indecency. And no one understands really why he didn't flee England. And so the first act of our play is about that. And it's a brilliant imagination by David Hare of what happened in the hotel room at the Cadogan Hotel in Sloane Street. And then the second act of the play deals with another moment that people don't really understand in the life of Wilde, which was why he went back to this hideous, plotting, maniacal, shrieking boyfriend who got him into so much trouble in the first place, which he did. He went back to him and they went to live in Naples together. And the second scene is of their split up, their final breakup.
Oh, wow. Sounds fascinating.
So it's a really good play.
Yeah, and
if you like
not
Wilde.
just a plug for you all to go and see it.
Right, no, it is a plug for you all to go and see it, but it's a really good play.
One of the biggest recent films we will have all seen you in is your turn as Miss Fritton in St. Trinian's. What made you take that role, create that role, and how was it to play her? Something completely different than what you've done before, I imagine.
I was just watching it one day with some friends, and the original films with Alistair Sim, and a friend of mine said, "Oh my God, you should try and redo those films." And I thought, "Oh, that is a really good idea." And so it took us about 4 or 5 years. The rights of it were very complicated to get because part of them was owned by an artist called Ronald Searle, and the other half was owned by some film studio. But we got them, and we made 2 films, and we're making a 3rd one next year, I think.
Fantastic. And how was it to play?
More X-rated than children oriented. I wanted her to be the headmistress of a public school outside Basingstoke, and for the girls to be, the dealers of ecstasy in the local town, and also to run illegal immigrants into England and stuff like that, to be a little bit more hardcore. But quite rightly, they realised, my producers, that it's a thing that children really adore. And actually, the original films are great for kids as well. So it was a little bit toned down for my taste, perhaps, but still, they were really fun to do.
That's great fun. So your books have been very roundly praised and just released, obviously, the latest book, The Vanished Years. Are you planning to continue writing in the future?
Yes, I want to write screenplays, and I'm trying to write a novel, but I also like trying to write about what's happening. I love memoirs myself from the 19th century. For example, doing research on Wilde, the books that are the most interesting are the ones written at the time. And, right from Samuel Pepys, people who write about what's going on at the time, particularly now, because you never really read anything that's true now, not in the newspaper anyway. So we have I think in the future, when people are trying to figure out the ins and outs of the weird world that we're living in now, it's going to be quite difficult to get a grip. So I think it's nice writing about, things that happen, places, and how towns are changing, and all the things that are happening in the world. So yes, I will write another memoir. My memoir is not exactly a memoir, really. It's kind of a travel book in a way.
Oh yeah. So what are some of the highlights we could read in your book?
It's about, from my point of view, it's about being middle-aged and what happens when around middle age, which is very, it's a lot about my father who died a couple of years ago, and dealing with death and the interesting. And there's a lot of death in it, actually, and a lot of portraits of people I've written about, and times, fashion, movies, making television. I find one of the things that's sad about all the endless press you read about films and film stars and movies, no one ever really writes about the mechanics of it, how it comes together, how it works, why it happens, and the process of getting it together. And it's really funny and hilarious, actually, always. And so in a couple of sections about America and Hollywood, I've written about just the story of what happens when you're putting together a project, and how it's weird, and all the various factions of people involved.
Can you give us any examples?
Well, for example, I did this, my one section is about an idea I came up with for a sitcom. Being a very greedy person, if you come up with the idea for an American sitcom and it plays for 3 years, you become a trillionaire, basically. And when you live in America, that's kind of how your mindset is all about making tons of money. So I thought, my God, I've got to try and come up with the idea for a sitcom as big as Friends. And one night I was asked by a group in a magazine to go to the British Embassy in Washington. And as I went through the door, I thought, my God, this is it, Mr. Ambassador, because the British Embassy in Washington is the campest place you can possibly go, because on one side it's a British stately home, and you walk through it, it's built by Lutyens, and you walk through it, and the back is a southern plantation house. So the inference about English ownership is brilliant, just to start with. It starts as an English country house, and then the backyard is, England's backyard, America. And that night there was Jack Straw there, and this historian called Simon Shamer, and they were all speaking, and it was just extraordinary. And being an ambassador is a very funny thing. And I thought, my God, I could rip off Yes Minister and make it into Mr. Ambassador, slightly more downbeat, slightly, and it started going really well. I managed to sell the story to NBC for tons of money, so I was really excited with myself, and I thought it all looked like it was going to go brilliantly. But basically, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it goes on and on and on. But the building up of that kind of thing, and trying to find all the people who have to get involved, and the actors and the directors and stuff, is a very funny story. And so that's one of my stories, for example.
That sounds great. Another bit of a frivolous question, but you've written a lot about the stars that you knew so well, and the Daily Mail serialised it as My Life with the Divas. I mean...
They did?
They did, yes. Not that I read the Daily Mail on a regular basis. But so, people like Madonna, Julia Roberts, Sharon Stone, do you have any exciting diva-esque story from that?
Well, I think, no, not really.
Oh, that's a shame.
I mean, not altogether, no. I don't think I can just reel off a Madonna story.
That's fine.
Not for the Cambridge Union.
We're more highbrow than that, clearly. And one final question. Of all the numerous parts you've played, whether on stage or on screen, do you have a particular favourite experience or favourite part that you felt you liked playing?
I don't know. I think... oh, sorry. I think I don't look in the past, really. I think I don't really think about any jobs I've done in the past, nor do I really look at them or try and hold on to them. The thing is, you have some successes, and they get you somewhere, and then you have some failures, and they take you back. And I think the adventures of jobs I really liked. I once spent a year in Moscow, a year and a half, 18 months in Moscow, making a Russian film. And it was in 1990, and it was the time that communism finally collapsed. And the adventure of it was incredible, and I enjoyed that very much. I also made a film once in Colombia, and I liked that very much. But actual films themselves, I think it's best, or the work you do. The great thing about something like theatre, for example, is the night is finished, it's finished. There's some photographs and that's it. And it lives in a memory to some people, but otherwise it's dead. And I think the best thing to do about everything, including yesterday, is die to it. Really.
And on that note, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So,
yes, does anyone have a question?
Yeah, anyone have any questions? Don't be shy. Oh, there's one over there. If you could wait for a microphone to get to you before the question, because we're recording.
I was just going to ask, are there any particular actors or actresses that you really enjoy working with?
Who have I? Yes, I enjoy working with all actors and actresses. I'm not. Yes, everyone I've worked with, I think, has been quite nice. Sometimes people are. No, I think most actors I've enjoyed with working. I think. I can't think of who I didn't really enjoy working with.
That's fine. Do you have another question at all? Yep, from the front here. Is that the only microphone?
Just going back to what you were saying about actors and actresses taking up corporate roles, what did you think about what happened with Natalie Portman when John Galliano made his anti-Semitic comments? Natalie Portman said, well, I won't be the face of Dior anymore unless you get rid of him. Do you have any feelings on that?
Well, because that was after he'd done that thing that had been filmed in the bar.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what she should have done. I think it was, apparently he used to go around everywhere. It wasn't just the first time that he did that. He's a poisonous drunk. And like a lot of couturiers, I think he's a kind of woman hater, or maybe in a way didn't like women, possibly. But I think it was at the same time quite, I don't know, I feel that everyone's got the colour turned up too high on their interior TV screens these days, because, it's, to destroy someone completely for that, I think is a lot. And Natalie Portman, everyone's got to do what they want to do. I don't really have an opinion about that, really. I'm sure you're pressurized to give up the job by everybody if you are Natalie Portman. And I think it is bad luck on him to have got caught like that and also very unfortunate to have those views when you're drunk. It's hideous. Whether you deserve to be completely ruined for it, I don't know. I think being a poisonous drunk is much more boring than the opinions that poisonous drunks have in a way. I think he sounded really irritating the way he kind of lurches on, I think it was very. I think he's quite. I don't know. I think it's quite nasty what he said, but at the same time, everything's about. He'll come back. He apologise. All you have to do is apologise. It's all a big drama, I feel.
Do you have another question? Another one in the front row here.
Hi, sorry. I had the microphone
that's fine.
before.
You go for it.
I hope you don't find this too frivolous, but what was it like acting or kind of speaking for an animated film like Shrek? And how did the sort of creative process differ and your interactions with your kind of fellow actors?
It's one of the best jobs ever, because actually that really is the non-job. You don't have to do anything. You go in about 5 times in the course of 2 or 3 years, and you record your whole part. They do the voices before they make the film, so they make a vocal sound. So all the actors go in on their own and do their part, and then they start putting the pictures together. And then occasionally you have to come back and change something and do something new. And the great thing about the Shrek films is they're brilliant, and you can do it wherever you are in the world. If you're somewhere and they need you, they hook you up to California on some satellite dish, and it's a really, really good job. Then you go around the world with everybody in a private jet to promote it, and you stay in really nice hotels. And you feel a bit embarrassed by the time you get to Venezuela, where it's not even your voice. Because by that time, it's a Spanish voice. And they get the guy who's done the Spanish voice to come in. You think, well, what am I really doing here? But it's all part of the thing. And it's really good. And also, it's got great pay. And so it was the best job. When I died in Shrek, I was very upset. Very upset, and I was when you never know when you're going to die either, because Jennifer Saunders was my mother, and I watched the film with her, the second one, and we both thought I did manage to make it onto the next one, and she thought she was making it onto the next one, and we just were both watching the end, and suddenly she went up in a puff of smoke, and we looked at each other, and I said, my God, how are you going to ever be able to come back from that? And her crown then rolled across the floor and disappeared. So the next one, I'm sitting there on my own without Jennifer this time, and I've recorded a whole section. I fall down and a tower collapses on top of me, and but I record this thing from inside the tower, help get me out, blah, blah, blah. The tower collapses, and I don't hear help get me out anywhere. And then I see my crown rolling across the floor. I think, oh, fuck, it's over. And so that's how it ended for me in Shrek. But it's the greatest job, the best one ever.
Are there any roles that British actors have got to before you that you really wish you'd got the chance to play first?
There's only one I can really think of, which is a film which is before all of your time, really, which was a film called The Mission, which Jeremy Irons played in. It's about a Jesuit priest in the 17th century in Colombia. And it's an amazing film. And I tried desperately to get into that film and never did. And that's my one regret. It's difficult because there's so many things. When you're an actor, you try for everything. And there's, most things you don't get. But that one, I do remember thinking it's something I would love to have been able to do.
Question from this side? Oh, yeah, with the orangey jumper. Could you...
Hi there.
Hi.
I was just wondering, you trained as an actor. How important do you view training is to become an actor? Do you say that it adds a lot, or do you think it's completely necessary? What are your views on it?
I don't know whether I have a view anymore, because it's a different world to when I started out. You could, we live in an X Factor world now, so anything can happen to anyone. I think it depends. In the old days, as I said before, any actor, cinema actor, TV actor, had to come through the theatre and work in theatre, and I think probably that was a good thing. And to get a lot of experience as an actor, that's the best schooling you can get. I think drama schools, I guess that I hated my one.
Where did you train?
I trained at one called the Central School of Speech and Drama, and I found it really boring. But that's because I had such a notion about show business and theatre and cinema, and it took me years to discover that my notion of it was just hopelessly wrong. If you want to go into acting or cinema or theatre because you think it's going to be bohemian It isn't, actually. It's quite militaristic. It's very organized. It's a business above and beyond anything else. It's very tough. And it's not what I thought it was going to be, cross-dressing and taking drugs and going on stage sloshed, unfortunately. It used to be.
I think, just before we go on, I think your mic might be rubbing against something.
Oh, right, okay.
So just turn it around.
Is that
That's
better?
okay now? Yeah. Well, the question next door, yeah?
I was just wondering, you said then about how you think that having the theatre as a training ground was a really good thing for people to have back in the days of like regional rep theatre. But I was just wondering if when you started out you viewed it as like a process for moving from theatre to eventually going into kind of television and films and things, and whether as your careers progress, obviously, you've done theatre and film kind of side by side throughout your career.
That can't be mine, because I'm not even moving.
Do we know?
Or is it?
I don't know.
Go on, anyway. Yeah.
Whether you kind of have consistently viewed that as a progression, or whether your kind of view on doing those things in parallel has like changed over your...
Well, the first repertory theatre I went to was it was an amazing theatre, and it had an extraordinary director in it, and I was very lucky to get into one that was very avant-garde and very famous in its way, and it was certainly one of the best. I think it was the only part of my show business experience that really wasn't a letdown. It was everything I'd imagined it would be, but I think it is important. I think. It depends, acting now, everything moves so fast now. Careers last for 2 seconds now in show business. It's just a different world. So I'm not really able to, I don't know how you would attack it now as a young person, really. It's very difficult. On the other hand, there's a ton more product than when I was a kid. There was just the BBC and ITV and a few films. Now there's tons and tons of stuff to do. But equally, there's tons and tons of actors, and I think it would be good for people to do theatre. But then again, if you get into things like EastEnders, some of the soaps here, they have a really high quality of acting, and that, in a way, is rather like a training of its own, because in a soap, you're forced to run the A to Z of emotion every week. One moment you're stabbing your father, the next minute you're having a baby. It takes you. It's not like normal stuff. And if you watch, I don't know whether any of you're probably all too highbrow, but I like EastEnders and Coronation Street. And when you watch them, they're just unbelievably well done and beautifully acted, beautifully imagined, and you have to work really fast. It's like in the old days when there was a thing called weekly rep acting, where you had to rehearse a play in a week and put it on for a week, and that meant you had to learn really fast to do your things, and you didn't have a lot of time to go, ooh, what's my character doing? You just did it, and that's very good for you, I think, and I think the soaps are very good like that for training.
Another question? Maybe from... There's one just here, the gentleman in the suit jacket.
This lady at the side.
Oh, yeah.
Her there.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go after.
We'll go this one first, and then we'll go to you next. So if we can get a microphone to you in anticipation as well, that'd be great.
Hello. I was just wondering if you had a favourite playwright, whether that was Oscar Wilde or if you had another besides him.
I think no, I don't have a favourite playwright. I do think I like Jacobean theatre. I like Marlowe very much, and I like those gory 16th century playwrights. I like Shakespeare. I like Christopher Hampton. There's a play I adore of his. Bond, Edward Bond is genius. Pinter, I think, is fantastic. I've been very lucky with Oscar Wilde and with Noel Coward. I don't know whether they're necessarily my favourite playwrights. I think they're brilliant, but they're a bit. No, they're really good too. I think there's a lot of great playwrights. I'd like to be in some Shakespeare next, if I was going to be in another play.
We were going to take this question next.
Hello there. As you mentioned the States and actually working in American films, I'm curious, what do you think about why there are so many British actors currently in leading roles in American television? Because for me at least, it seems there are way more than it was about 10 years ago. So not just supporting roles, but leading roles in American television.
Yeah, I mean, the English, we're like the people who built gargoyles on cathedrals. You know, you go where the work is, and the English actors are very popular. But we are, I think, we're quite practical, and you know, everyone working here is quite hard work. So I think they appreciate the fact that we're pretty good at it in general, and we tend to come up with characters that are a little bit more strongly drawn than Americans maybe in a way. You know, if you take that guy, I can't remember what his name is, who's in Hugh Laurie, for example, typical example of the most successful English actor in Hollywood, really, in a way. His series has been very successful, but in a way, in America's become such a victim of political correctness in a way that kind of raw, rough type of actor doesn't really exist so much anymore. They're all of a generation before. Everyone's a little bit more cheesecakey now in America, in a way. So I think that's what, and that we get also from all our soaps. We have much rawer, we've got quite, you know, gritty people, I think. That's why they do very well in America.
Another question? There in the black jumper. Yep.
Hello. I'm interested in directing, and so I just wondered what qualities you as an actor look for in a director.
I think a director has to have a real angle on the story she wants to tell, or he wants to tell, most of all. I think what you're looking for in a director is someone who has a vision of the world, and is not just a lot of directors don't seem to me nowadays to have, well, I don't know, it's become so technical, everything, but I think to be a good director, you need to have an angle on life, and you have to have a view on people. If you don't have a view on people, but one's very discouraged to have a view on people nowadays because we live in a world that's too politically correct to have views. But I think as a director, what's going to make your film interesting is if you're looking at people through what you think of people in general, or the characters, and you're not just. I think you can't be bland as a director.
Another question? We'll take the one in the red jumper, and can we also get a microphone to the guy in the grey jumper meanwhile?
You said it's no good trying to tell people that they should be like other people, but when you were starting out, was there anyone that you looked to and you said, yes, them?
Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth Taylor.
No, not really. I just thought I was going to be... I thought I was going to be it. You know, I think you have to have a much blinder... I think everyone wanting to be the new so-and-so that's really boring. Because that's the culture we live in. It's totally constipated.
Or like any parts that you were inspired by, anyone you saw doing a part and you thought, that's the sort of thing I want to be doing?
Yes, definitely. I knew quite early on what kind of films I liked and stuff like that, and I didn't like very mainstream things. I didn't like very butch things like James Bond particularly. I liked more arty things, but I didn't want to be somebody else. And that's what I find very obnoxious about the X Factor culture, is that it's just churning out new versions of old things. And that's, in a way, what show business and cinema has become completely. It's just trying to make something that was as successful as the last successful thing. And what it means is our culture has become completely... Well, nothing happens, as far as I can see, on the whole.
And just a really quick thing, as you just said you wanted to do some Shakespeare, and do you see a specific role that you would like to play?
I'd like to be Shylock, because it's a really short role as well, because some of those Shakespearean roles are very tiring. They go on forever. But Shylock has about 3 scenes, and he really cleans up in each scene he does. And so I'd like to play Shylock.
The guy in the grey jumper? Yeah.
You say the world of acting has changed quite a bit, and you sound fairly negative of that. Do you think it's changed positively in any ways?
Yes, I think, for example, yes, I do. I did a play just last year called Pygmalion with a girl called Cara Toynton, and she had been in EastEnders for a long time, and she could do anything. She was really, really excellent. She'd never been in a play before. Normally speaking, when you go into the rigors of trying to reproduce half an hour of work every night, it's very complicated. But I think British television is great in many ways. We do amazing things, and I think so. I'm not really. I think in some terms in England we have great, much better than France, much better than Germany, much better than Australia. We really do have a lot here of good stuff. I know you probably think I'm harping on, but if you do, just looking at EastEnders and Coronation Street, the drama in it, the way they're done, the storytelling is really, really good. You won't see anything like that in the rest of the world. And Shamelesses and all those kind of things, they're amazing. Also, America does come up with some very good television, I think, as well. You know, there's that weird one about the guy dealing crystal meth. I don't know whether you've seen any of Bad. What's it called? Yeah, I mean, that is kind of extraordinary. It's a really out there idea. But I'm disappointed in more. I suppose, I'd always wanted to be a movie actor, and I'm disappointed in the world of films in one sense, because I think it's turned into it's run by marketing people, actually. So what the marketing people want is they want to make a film that everyone will go to. That means a whole family, granny, mummy, 2 children, and everyone. And what you end up having as the mainstream culture is Harry Potter, and a lot of fairy stories that somehow manage to involve the whole family. They're what used to be called B-movies, but now are the mainstream. So that kind of thing I'm a bit disappointed by.
Just on that topic, are there any films that you've seen recently or that are coming out recently that you do think defy that tendency to produce B-movies that are very good?
I think, this week, for example, there's a new Bond movie out, and it's great, it's brilliant, because the Bond franchise, to keep it going, is an extraordinary thing. Everything about this new one, I think, looks like it's not my type of film, actually, but I think everything about it does look like it's really come up to the challenge. But no, there's lots of. I'm not saying there's not great films. I'm just saying that the main thrust of the movie world, I think, is challenging because it's based on success, past success. People trying to reproduce something that's been successful before. That's the main thrust of it all, and. That differs from television. For example, that show about crystal meth. Who'd have ever thought if you said someone's going to pitch an idea about a man who is going to start dealing crystal meth because something happens, they just say, you're mad. But it happens, and it's really brilliant. So I think television, there's a lot more stuff going on in a way.
Do we have a question from the gallery? Yeah, the lady in the blue jumper.
Hi, you've mentioned drugs a couple of times. I was wondering what your personal opinion is on the current drug laws in the UK, and then possibly on a wider scale with America's war against drugs and the effects it's having on places like Latin America.
On Colombia. I think my personal view about drugs is I don't take them anymore. However, on the other hand, I did take a lot. Someone once said to me, I used to take drugs in the 80s, now I take them in any temperature. But my feeling as a middle-aged person, and my book deals with it, is that I very much value what's left of my brain. And now I don't want to take any drugs. I think drugs are not the answer to anything, but at the same time, I think the fact that they're illegal is crazy. Because the damage that is done by the war on drugs is way outnumbers the damage. I think in this room, or of all of us, there's always going to be somebody who is going to have some ghastly story happen to them with addiction to something, because there's some of us who are going to be like that. I think and I'm not saying this, any mother whose daughter has died from ecstasy, of course that's hideous, awful, but at the same time, it would be much better to have all these drugs legal and properly made, and it could get us out of recession a little bit, because the government could charge tax for it. Certain countries could come out of terrible warfare. The Americans poison all the rivers of Colombia so that there's cripples all over the place. So actually, buying of your gram of coke now is a criminal thing in a different way, because you're partaking in some awful suffering, which is unnecessary. And it would be better if you didn't have to. And most people, I think, who take drugs take them as part of a phase in life. And normally they move into them, they move out of them. And I think the people who really get heavily into them, I think those people are going to get heavily into something normally. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, and I do know it's, I've got friends who've died of drug overdoses and stuff, and it's very tragic. But I don't think that's the reason to say, ooh, we can't have. People are going to go on taking drugs anyway, come what may. So I think not facing up to the reality of it is another example of how backward the powers that be are.
Sure, another question from the gallery as well. In the white shirt? Yeah.
Hi, just going back to what you were saying about soaps. I read an article saying that the director who is in charge of EastEnders based a lot of their plots on Greek tragedy, and I thought that was really interesting. And I was wondering what you thought about the idea of the classics as a base for a lot of modern texts, and looking back to old literature, and what you can do to be new and original and readapt things. I think it takes a lot to shock these days, and I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Well, I think the first thing is Greek tragedy. He's not quite right, because in Greek tragedy, the action always takes place off stage, and then someone runs on to, oh, sir, this happened and that happened and that happened, and you have to imagine it. And in the soaps, but I can see what he means. In the soaps, the tragedy and the drama is on stage. I think the classics, someone who writes soap, who knows the classics, I'm sure is going to, come up with something much more textured and layered. And I'm sure they're all the people. I sometimes work with one of the writers from EastEnders, and he's a very literate person. So I think it's great to be able to draw on the classics. For example, that play that has been on, Two Governors, One
Man, Two Governors.
One Man, Two Governors. That's based on a play by, I don't know whether it's Ben Jonson. It's anyway, 17th century play, just revamped, which is a brilliant idea as well, because there's tons of plays like that you can use and make into modern things as well. So I think it's great to know as much as you can.
Question at the back there, brown hair.
You were talking about the leaning towards mainstream in film in this century. And if you think back to 20th century, especially theatre drama, that you had great playwrights like Terence Rattigan, where a lot of the emotion and the storyline was left unsaid. I was wondering what your opinion is, in theatre especially, about the power of the unstated as opposed to the stated.
I'm not crazy on. Noel Coward and Terence Rattigan and those British playwrighs from the 40s and 50s, I think, are not as good as their American counterparts. Tennessee Williams is, I think, a great hero of theatre, and he certainly doesn't balk at dealing with emotions and people having breakdowns or being sexually obsessed or whatever. I think there's something to be said for, in one sense, the opportunity is offered to you as an actor in a Terence Rattigan play to act inwardly something that is not in the script. So that can be quite nice. But I find those plays, for the most part, not as good. I think American playwrights, on the whole, until the 60s, until the sexual revolution, when suddenly you got Edward Bond, and then tons of Christopher Hampton, Michael Story, a lot of great writers. I think pre-war England, it was for me, my taste, it's a bit too staid, and the 50s in England.
Another question from this side? At the front here.
I was going to ask, how has your experience of being in the public eye changed over your years in show business? So do you feel as if journalists today are more ruthless or more invasive?
I think certainly the media is very invasive now, and if you're going to tell a lie about anything, you better have some good backup, and because people want to know everything about you, and and also between the celebrity and the journalist, it's a rather unhappy marriage, because actually we both need each other. But at the moment we're at an impasse, sort of, because the celebrity never wants to say anything to the journalist. The journalist knows maybe that the celebrity is, a sexaholic, but they can't talk about it, and they want to trick. It's a very, I think it's a difficult relationship at the moment. But I think the media is quite scary. The press is very, very scary in a way nowadays, and it wasn't before. It was much more innocent, really, in the old days.
So do you regret saying anything to a journalist?
No, not really, because I feel that in my relationship with journalists, I've got to say what I think. If they then adapt it, then they must adapt it. But I don't want to go into a thing like that with a feeling of distrust, because I don't see the point. I think there's, if you're going to talk about, if a whole lot of, a page of a newspaper is going to be given to me, I might as well not tell a lie. I might as well say what I think. And I think then it's up to people if they like you or not like you. But I don't really regret anything, no, not particularly. I mean, I regret things when they're misrepresented of what I said. But that's one of the things you have to put up with or get out, really.
We have time for about 3 more questions, so I'll at the front in the blue jumper, then the one behind, and then you again.
You've had quite an interesting life, and I think you're quite honest about the fact you've had to take the rough with the smooth at various points. Is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd known at our age, kind of just starting out, working out what we're going to do with our lives?
Yes, but then all those things are useless to tell anyone, because relax is what I would have said to myself. But there's no point saying to a young person, relax, because you feel, when I felt anyway, when I was young, there was no time. And there wasn't. And then when you're older, you realise that there was tons of time, and you could relax much more and not be. I was just like a full blue bottle stuck in a jam jar when I was a kid, bashing against the edges. And but that kind of advice is not really. There's no point. People, I think you have to. Everyone drives their own course, and when you're young, you're not really there to listen to other people, I don't think, much. Are you? And if you are, you're getting it wrong, I think.
Let's get in the blue jumper there. The guy in the blue jumper here, was that the question? Do you have a microphone?
Of course, have you ever felt that your sexuality has seriously inhibited your career, and have you ever sort of missed out on getting a part and you thought it was because of your sexuality? And on the other side, do you think that there have ever been any benefits in your being openly gay, and any time that you think, well, it's only because of that I've got the part, and does that make you frustrated?
Definitely, there's tons of parts I haven't got because I'm openly gay, but at the same time, I don't think I think I've got also a lot from being it, probably, as well. So there's always, I think if you're an actor, we're terrible whiners, actors. You're always whining about something. Everybody is. And there's always something that's elusive to you. And I think now, older and I suppose a little bit more stable in my work life in a way, I think I just kind of accept it in a way now. But when I was younger, it was certainly really frustrating to me.
Did you notice a big change in your career at the point where you came out?
Well, I came out very early, so my career was, it was always being affected by it, really. Taxed at source, really. That's how I saw it.
So the final question at the front here.
You said there's been huge leaps forward in kind of people's acceptance of homosexuality, especially in the acting profession, but you can kind of count on 2 hands the number of great roles for which are either of a homosexual man or a homosexual woman where they have a same-sex relationship. They're not the marginalised character, and it doesn't become a controversy. Brokeback Mountain, was hugely controversial and everyone went to see it because it was about a gay couple. Do you think we will ever progress so far forward that it will be seen just as a great film rather than a great film about two gay men?
Well, you have to remember that there's one gay person to 9 straight people, and movie business is a business, and so you're trying to please mostly the 9 people. So I don't think there's going to be 5 gay films and 5 straight films ever, necessarily. But there are. I agree. I mean, it's still an issue, you know. But that's how we are. Maybe, you know, any minute now, men are going to be able to get pregnant. So then, what's going to happen? Half of us are going to be sitting here like this, not drinking water, and going into labour next week. And at that point, I guess those things will be obsolete. But you know, yes, there definitely is. There definitely is. You know, sometimes they make films. Those I think hideous group American films where there's, you know, the token everything is in it. But again, political correctness has made this even harder because now you have to be so nice about everybody. You can only smoke a cigarette if you're the villain. You can all these things that it's giving us a version of the world that's so stunted and weird and like a wonky mirror in a circus that I don't know, you know. I don't know. But, you know, things will change. Keep changing, I suppose.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope, that's it, is it?
Yeah, well, unless we don't have that much time, but we have.
Right.
So that's probably it. But Rupert will be sticking around for a bit outside to sign his book, which is on sale here, or to have a little chat. So do join us outside or have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.